the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. Good afternoon, Freedom Church. It's Pastor Thaddeus coming to you live and direct. I'm so glad you were able to join us today. I am streaming from what will be our future worship center. You can take a quick look. Man, oh man, oh man. I can't wait until you walk into this place and see it with your own eyes. God bless you guys. Listen, you know how the internet is. We got to keep it moving. I only got about 20 minutes today, so join with me, with your families, with your friends. Grab a seat around the couch and let's talk. I'm going to open up my Bible to the book of Psalm chapter 34. Join me today. Psalm 34, verse 1 through 3 says this: I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be on my lips. My soul makes its boast in the Lord. And then he says this, which is mind-boggling. He says, let the afflicted hear and be glad. Let the afflicted hear and be glad. You know, I'll never forget a Sunday a couple months ago in February. And at the end of our time of worship, I called the worship team back up on the stage. And I remember turning around to look at our worship team. And as I look at them, they all look like they've seen a ghost. And Joey looks down, he leans towards me, and he says, Thaddeus, Kobe Bryant died. Now, first off, I am not a fan of Kobe's, nor am I a fan of LeBron's. I mainly knew Kobe through Pastor Keith's obsession and his lifelong fandom with Kobe Bryant. But later that day, I felt pain in my heart, in my soul. I guess growing up in Chicago, basketball was this type of redemption. It wasn't just a way out. It was how we channeled our own dreams in life. So the highest form of life to us was not becoming a president or a doctor or an attorney. The highest point was if you could just be like Mike, MJ. I'm wearing his shoes today. And people that move through, attorneys, all these people, they would spend as much money as possible just so they can go and watch these individuals play. And when I was an adult, I was 23 years old the first time I met MJ. And when I walked by him, my heart just skipped a beat. It was the first time I got starstruck as a grown man. And the only other person since him that has reached that type of cult-like status beyond MJ was Kobe. You know, not for our generation, but for the next generation. And the same way my dad talked about Dr. J, how MJ could never touch Dr. J, that's how I talk about MJ versus Kobe. And there's this continuity amongst us around this common faith and this common sport that gives us all hope. And those who didn't just make it to the league, but became top 10, top 5, the number one. Who is the greatest of all time? Who is the GOAT? These are the individuals that we would trade our very lives to become. They are the ones who our society has taught us that is who we are ascending to become. These are the gods. These are the greatest amongst us, and gods are not supposed to die. You know, I remember going shopping after church and two brothers walk up and we look at each other and we know something is wrong. We all felt this pain together, and I just said, hey man, I can't believe it was Kobe. And they high five and we walk away, and the one brother said, this feels like 9/11. And it's a rare moment when we as a country experience cognitive dissonance together. Cognitive deals with our intellect, and dissonance, it's when musical notes lack the harmony, and it creates this chaos. And when something happens in your life that you believe could not happen, your brain, it starts to move in disharmony and disbelief, because we all know that the God shouldn't die, and the greatest amongst us shouldn't die. And if who I aspire to be can die in an instant, in an innocuous moment of going through the mundane steps of just going to a game, then what about me? And if you listen to this podcast for 1 hour, more than 5 children will have died from abuse and violence. And if we listened for an entire day, 100 kids would die violently today. And this is only one way for us to suffer. Thousands die every day from traffic accidents, sickness. Hundreds of thousands learn that their loved ones are suddenly gone and the pain in their life is shaken. It is the comparison, church, of a small city being swept away on a daily basis. But we live in Chicago. We live in a city so hardened by pain that we are desensitized to 75 people shot in Chicago on a weekend. There are no headlines because pain and misery is the norm for us. As a matter of fact, the suffering is so prevalent that everything I said just now should make us weep, but we don't even blink. Whenever tragedy strikes, we have this psychological mechanism, and it's this defense mechanism that goes to work. And we think to ourselves that these type of things don't happen to us. They happen to other people, the other folks. It happens to poor people, to evil people, to people who don't take precautions, to people that aren't quarantined in their homes, to people that went out to buy toilet paper. Who has the COVID now? Not me. I'm glad I don't live in New York. I'm glad I don't live in China. I would have never gone to that club. I don't fit that description. I live healthier than that. And we all walk around with this defense that says it could never happen to us. See, our favorite pastime is keeping death at bay. That's why we work out and eat right and get checkups. But sometimes pain has no name. A shooter in a nightclub, a shooter in a Jewish synagogue in Pennsylvania. Death has no description, no place, no club, no town, no religion, no ethnicity, no status. Death has no friends. And the COVID-19 for all of us brought death to our doorsteps. And we cover our mouths and say, it's only going to happen to others. See, Ernest Becker says, I think that taking life seriously means something like this, that whatever we do on the planet has to be done in the lived truth of the terror of creation. Or as Tim Keller said so eloquently, the rumble of panic underneath everything. See, the prosperity gospel makes you think that we are immune and offers some false hope. That is not the real gospel, because no amount of luck and money and power and planning, none of that stuff can stop bereavement and illness and relationship betrayals and financial disasters and a flu virus. And when tragedy strikes close, people have called me about their cousins in New York who have this virus and this pain and their kidneys are failing. And when tragedy strikes, we become numb. We become like the walking dead. And we scratch around for some reason to give our life hope. You know what? Tonight I'm going to watch that next episode of The Tiger King. That'll help. Hey, Ozarks, Netflix just released the next season of Ozarks. That'll make me happy. Today will be a good day. But all of these hopes are fleeting. And Kobe reminded us that even in the height of our joy and success in life, that sometimes we can still face pain. Our existence, church, is subject to forces outside of us. And if you watch news enough, you will start to feel this panic in your very soul. And when my brain goes to a place of panic, I only know of one way out. For me, it is a journey into the immersion of the only hope that I have. The psalmist says, I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be on my lips. My soul makes its boast in the Lord. He says, let the afflicted, those who are going through pain and suffering, let the afflicted hear this and be glad. What is there to be glad about? C.S. Lewis says, God whispers to us in our pleasures, but he shouts to us in our pain. See, when pain and suffering come upon us, we finally see not only that we were not in control of our lives, but that, church, we never were in control. Jesus is all you will ever need to get through, but you will never know he is all that you need until he is all that you have. When I want to start today and give you just a couple thoughts about the great doctrines of our faith, whenever I feel the panic in my own soul, this is, church, how I encourage myself. And if you allow the doctrines of our faith to become real, it can be a starting point in how, even in the midst of your affliction, you can declare, his praise will be on my lips. I will bless the Lord at all times. So let me start with point one. I want you to think about creation and the fall of man. See, Genesis 1 shows us that humanity placed by God into a world without death, without suffering, without pain, without evil. Evil was never a part of the original design. It wasn't God's intent that any of us should die, because God didn't originally design evil. So even when my grandmother, Imogene Dillman, died at the ripe age of 98 peacefully, it was still not the way things should be. I still feel that death is wrong in my soul, because something about me was not meant for mortality. I wasn't made for love to be lost, and I rage against the triumph of darkness and death. I didn't marry my wife, who I love with all my heart, to one day not be with her again. That's one thing that the Mormons have on us with their eternal marriage, etc. But don't worry, Joanna, you're off the hook in heaven. See, we pastors tell you that death is a normal part of life, but no matter how many times we say it, people fight it, because there is this inner hope that love will last, life will last, relationships will last, your breath will last. Ecclesiastes says God has set eternity in the hearts of men. But when our relationship with God was broken, it created this gap. You know, for those of you who know me and come to Freedom Church, you know how much I love to play golf. I can't help it. Golf is what I do. You cannot play good golf when your life is stressed. It's impossible. And the worst golf ever, if I'm going to shoot in the 90s, if I'm going to shoot in the hundreds, the worst golf is when my wife and I have some issues going on. Happy wife, happy life. A broken relationship with my wife affects every other area of my life, not just golf. It affects my joy. It affects my peace. It affects my sense of self-worth, because my wife is the person that left everything to come and be with me. We are one. So when there is this friction and this tension, there is a brokenness and a separation. But imagine severing a relationship with the author of life. And once we rejected God, we lose this relationship. So every other relationship in our life is now affected. Our emotional life, our hearts, our bodies, our relationship even to the natural world becomes dangerous, because everything started moving in the wrong direction. So when you go outside, you see thorns and thistles growing with food and flowers. And there's so much good in the world, but it is far short of God's original intentions. The brokenness of the world is all of our inheritance. Good people, bad people, all people. As people, we are all the recipients of humanity. And here's the crazy part, church. God owes none of us a comfortable life. And we can fall into confusion when our life begins to go awry and we become practical deists, and we see a God as a person whose job it is to meet our needs. That God, you owe me a comfortable life. Where is my comfort? Where is my peace? But if you believe that God owes you a good life, it's unwarranted. It is a world that revolves around you and not around Almighty God, because if really is an infinitely glorious God, why should the universe revolve around us rather than around God? And if you look at the standards of God's behavior and you look at humanity's record, whether it's Hitler or Idi Amin or Pol Pot, you don't ask yourself, why does God allow evil? Rather, you say, in light of us, in light of humanity, why does God even allow happiness? See, creation and the fall remove our sense of self-pity, and there is a strength and an ability to not be surprised at the mess we've made of this. See, the fall of man forces me to realize that I too am a part of the problem. I am a descendant of Adam in my humanity. Listen, allow me to go just a little bit deeper. Without evil and our sin and the predicament we're all in, we would have never have known the courage of God and the depth and the extent of God's love for us. What kind of a God would lay aside his own glory and go to a cross? You know, life is filled with so many of these delights, the intimacy of romance, the beauty of a landscape or an ocean view, the pleasure of food, the sheer joy you're going to have tonight watching your next favorite show, the pleasure of wine, the joy of friendship, the feeling we get watching the greatest amongst us play sports. But that joy that we feel on a day-to-day basis is incomparable from the moment we see God face to face. We will one day, all of us, land in eternity and say, I cannot believe we used to live like that. Dwayne Wade, when he spoke about Kobe's death, he said his death is like a bad dream and I just want to wake up. Church, do you realize this is the very way theologians describe the resurrection of Jesus? The resurrection of his saints? It's like waking up from a bad dream. And Jonathan Edwards said of this, he said that because of his redemption, we will have an intimacy with God that is so deep that even the angels are envious of this. See, the incarnate God is a God who suffers. We trust in God's sovereignty, that God, this sovereign God, came down to earth and he has drunk the cup of suffering down to the dregs. And he did it not to justify himself, but rather to justify us. He bore our suffering, death, curse for sin, the sins that we have earned. And he takes that punishment on himself so that one day he can return and end evil without having to condemn us. See, in Christ, the fullness of the Godhead dwelt bodily, and he was weak. He suffered, Hebrews says, with loud cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. He knew betrayal. He knew poverty. He knew abuse. He knew disappointment and despair and bereavement and torture. And finally, he knew a criminal's agonizing death at the young age of 33. We serve a God who voluntarily became weak and dove into vulnerability and the darkness out of his great love for us. And Philippians 2 said he laid aside his glory because of his love for us. John Dixon, who was speaking on the wounds of God on a university campus in Australia, during the question time, a Muslim man rose to explain how preposterous was the claim that the creator of the universe should be subjected to the forces of his own creation, that he would have to eat and sleep and go to the restroom, and let alone that one would die on a cross. And he says it is illogical that the first cause would have pain inflicted on him by lesser beings. And the minister followed up and said, thank you for making the uniqueness of the Christian claim so clear. Church, our God has wounds. What does this mean, and what does this matter in this moment where we're all in this crisis and we're all in this panic? It means this: we don't know the reason why God allows evil and suffering to continue, or the COVID virus at this point, or why it is so random, but we do know the reason it is not. It cannot be because he does not love us. It can't be because he doesn't care for us. God is so committed to our ultimate end that he was willing to plunge himself into the greatest depths of suffering himself. Hebrews says we do not have a high priest who cannot be touched with the feelings of our infirmities. In Hebrews chapter 4, the Bible says he can be touched with the feelings of our infirmities. The NIV says he can empathize with our weakness. And empathy is when we experience what they are going through within that other person's frame of reference. It is the capacity to place oneself in another person's position. See, empathy deals in the realm of our emotions. I can empathize with someone who has going through a tough patch in their marriage because I know what it feels like to be married. I can empathize with someone losing a parent because 13 years ago, my mother died tragically of cancer, and that same night, my father's heart gave out on him. I understand. My body and my mind and my emotions can empathize with someone that's going through it because I feel your pain inside of my own body. So when I go to the hospital, most times I'm crying with the family, not just because of their pain, but because in myself, I remember the pain and the loss. I remember how my life stopped. Time stopped. I couldn't wrap my mind around never hearing the voice of the people who I love the most. I am not a passive bystander at the hospital. I am an active participant because I have been touched with the feelings of your infirmities. And church, we don't have a high priest who cannot be touched with the feelings of our infirmities. He can feel your pain, not as an outsider, but from your point of reference. Every loss, every pain, every heartache, every broken piece of our life, every worry, he knows. He is God with us. He was wounded for our transgressions and bruised for our iniquities, and by his stripes we are healed. In the world, Jesus says, you will have trouble, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. A day is coming. Here's the take home. When I'm going through, I use comedy all the time because that's part of the way I deal with pain. But when I'm in pain and hurting, I yell at the heavens. God, why? What are you doing? What now? How do I go forward? And Jesus looks at me in my pain and he says, love me and love others. And when we look around and see all the pain that this COVID virus is causing in our world and in our homes, when this is over, every single one of us will be affected by this virus. And it pains me to think of the people that are going to have to go through this. But when I'm going through it, I hug my wife deeper. I love the people around me. I saw some people from the church today, and we were at a distance, and I told them when they left, I said, man, I love you guys. See, cognitive dissonance works in the negative, but it can also work in the positive. It's like when you win a lottery check and your brain says, no way this can happen. Listen, your love should create cognitive dissonance in others. Your love is supposed to make the ones around you confused. Church, love deeply. And I want to remind you that 2,000 years ago, another God, the God, walked amongst us. And he wasn't known for his basketball prowess. He was known for his love. And his love was confusing and reckless, and it would go after the one and the lost sheep. His love was ridiculous love. And this same God had followers. He had fans, and he also died a quick, untimely death at the age of 33. And those who were following him and watching him lost hope, and they experienced that same cognitive dissonance. They couldn't believe that the one who replaced eyes and multiplied food and raised Lazarus from the dead and turned water into wine, that he died. And they said, if he can die, what hope is there for us? But there was a huge difference. And as a church, we're going to be celebrating this in the next few weeks, because 3 days later, he looked those same disciples in the eye, and in a moment, he shifted everything, and he changed the power of death. And he said, "O death, where is your sting? O grave, where is your victory?" And here we sit. Surely this cannot be. But his love is stronger than death. Love those around you deeper. Be more present, and let love define us as a church. This is our finest moment. Love more, love deeper, love harder, because our God showed us that love is the only thing that's greater than death. I pray for your families. To Christ be the glory. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the